Welcome back to the Way to Native Chronicles. Here in my reloading room, we're going to talk about a subject that it's going to be fairly complex, a little bit lengthy, and it's a subject I think occurs to many people as they go about to purchase their first firearm especially, and this has to do with how to choose a big game rifle. This is a subject that you need to take a lot of factors into account, and you have to have a good basic understanding of hunting. So what we're going to try to do here in this video is take out a whole bunch of the factors that really aren't as important as they seem to be, the things that you hear and read about, what the manufacturers tell you that you got to have in their never-ending search for selling you new gizmos and things like that. And we're going to focus on what are the most important aspects of a big game rifle and cut through all the crap. So this video won't apply to every single hunter that's out there. There's special cases that apply, but I think it'll apply to the vast majority of hunters. So let's get into this. What we're going to do in this video is I'm going to break this subject down into a bunch of myths. Let's call them that. And these myths are going to be summarized as follows and dealt with in this order in the video. First of all, we're going to deal with the Magnum myth. The next subject we're going to deal with is the range myth. Following that, we're going to deal with what I call the resources myth. Next we'll start dealing with the shooting stance myth. And then after that, we'll deal with the sight in distance myth, and we'll conclude with a very important subject, the fancy scopes myth. So let's get started. Okay, the Magnum myth. Let's start there. What do I mean by the Magnum myth? The Magnum myth is what I'd call using the failure to put the right priority on bullet trajectory over the energy of a bullet, thinking that a powerful bullet hitting an animal is going to solve all your problems. And let's just get this out of the way right now. It's not going to solve your problems. The way hunting takes place in the field is you're going to be in a very fluid environment, dealing with targets at all kinds of distances, and you're going to need to make your decisions fast, and you don't have the time to do any calculations in your head. It's going to be pretty reactive. So what you need in the field is a gun that can hit an animal at pretty well any distance that is feasible, and do it quickly. Now, a lot of hunters seem to think that hitting the animal with a lot of power is necessary, but in reality, it's not like in the movies. When you see a guy getting hit with a bullet and the guy goes flying across the room and against the opposite wall, you know, it really doesn't happen like that. When bullets strike an animal, a well-placed bullet is going to put that bullet through both of the lungs of the animal. And when the bullet goes through the lungs, there's two things that happen mainly, and that is that there's a vacuum inside the rib cage. This vacuum inside your rib cage has to exist in order for your lungs to expand. That's how you breathe in. If there's air pressure from the outside inside your rib cage, you can't breathe in. There's no muscles that are pulling your lungs to expand. They have to have a vacuum so that they can expand. Once the vacuum is lost, they just flutter around inside, and you can't breathe in. So that's very important to keep in mind when you're hunting. That's how you're really killing an animal, is you're stopping their lung function for the most part. And the other part of that is when a bullet goes through the lungs, you're going to end up with blood loss, filling the lungs, so further incapacitating the lungs' ability to function. So when these two things happen, especially when the animal's under stress and tries to run, when its lungs don't work, it's a very short period of time that passes before the animal asphyxiates, basically. So all that kind of stuff, that doesn't take a whole lot of power to accomplish. You can ask any bow hunter. It's not the hitting power, it's the killing effect is different than that. Another thing to take into consideration regarding this is your ability to hit the target well. And this is a kind of a difficult subject to describe, but when you're shooting a very high recoiling rifle and the recoil is very violent, it has a tendency to cause you to flinch. And in order to become a good hunter, you have to be a good shot. And in order to be a good shot, you have to have mastery of your rifle. And if the rifle is hurting you all the time, it's really hard to become a good shot. Now, a lot of people can do that after many years of practice, and you almost start to enjoy the heavy recoiling rifle. But really for most hunters, and especially for those who are starting out, having a rifle that recoils heavily is very detrimental to mastering your ability to shoot. And let's not be under any misconceptions here, and be honest with ourselves. Shooting is not something that you're born with as a skill. It's something that you acquire. I mean, just like throwing a rock. If you've never thrown a rock before, you're not going to hit a target. You've got to practice and practice. And shooting is a skill that requires actually quite a bit of coordination between hand and eye. So you're doing multiple things at the same time, and if you have something entering into your brain with your sort of what they call your animal brain in the background saying, we got to brace for this, this is going to hurt, that's just going to work its way into your shooting process, and you're not going to become a good shot. And if you don't become a good shot, you wind up hitting animals in the wrong places, and having a heavy hitting rifle is not going to save you. You put a bullet through an animal's guts, he's going to run off, and you're probably not going to find them. And the animal's going to suffer a pretty bad death. Okay, so let's get all the stuff out of the way about that, oh, I can do it and stuff like that. Go out to the range and actually do it. We're going to get into this a little bit further, but for now, let's focus on the aspect of accuracy with your rifle when hunting. So the next question we should deal with is when it comes to choosing a milder recoiling rifle, how mild is too mild? That's a good question. Here in Alberta, where I live, we focus a lot on hunting moose. Those are pretty big animals, and let's look at it this way. In the hunting regulations, it states that you have to use a caliber of rifle over 22 caliber. So that means that a .243 is already legal. And this kind of regulation isn't just pulled out of the air. It's based on hard-earned study, and it's based on experience. If you take rifles in the past, like the 30-30s and the British 303s, those also were quite low power rifles, and tons of moose have been brought down with those rifles. So it's not inadequate for getting animals. The main thing is that you put your shot in the right place. The 30-30 that I use has been very effective. I've never had a moose get away from me yet with one. So let's take the .243 then. That's kind of the extreme case, but when my wife started hunting, she wanted a rifle, and I suggested to her to go with a .243, even though we do hunt a lot of moose, because for me the main thing was that she's a good shot and puts the bullets where they ought to be, and has a gun also that if you say, let's go take a few shots at the range for practice, that it's not going to be something that she doesn't enjoy. So as a result, she's become a very good shot over the years. And she's been hunting for quite a while. I'm very glad that she started with a .243, and she is still using a .243. Not only her, but since it's easier to share ammunition, I've got a 243 as well, and we both hunt with the same rifle when I'm not using my 30-30. So the 243, like the 30-30, it's we've never had a moose get away from us. They go down very quickly. So it's all about shot placement. We take great care to put the shot where it ought to be. We do some practice, hand load ammunition. We know exactly where those bullets are going to hit. And if there's any opportunity to to rest the gun on something solid, or a tree, or kneeling down, or laying down, we try to make the best shots we can, and that's really where the focus has to be. We don't rely on the power of the rifle to do the work for us and just figure, well, we hit them somewhere and we're going to get them. You've got to hit those animals in the right place. So that's our approach. So all this isn't to say that if somebody handed me a 30-06 or a 270 that I wouldn't gladly take it. I would be happy to hunt with a 30-06 or a 270. I have hunted with 30-06 before. It works just great. But it's not needed to such an extent that I'm going to go out and buy one. I'm sort of a frugal hunter. We hunt a lot for the purpose of putting meat in the freezer. It does actually help our budget out, and we raised our children on moose meat mostly. So I don't have a great urge to go out and buy a 30-06 or something like that, simply because there's no pressing need. What I have is working just fine. But if someone put one in my hands, sure, I'd use it, and maybe someday I will get one if I got too much money in my pocket. But our 243s, the way we go about it with those rifles is we use 100 grain bullets, hand-loaded ammunition. So we have lots of ammunition. We can go out to the range and we can practice and prove these loads and get very familiar with our rifles. And those rifles are sighted in to 0 at 300 yards. And with a 243 of the type of load that we're using, we can have what you call a point-blank range of up to 360 yards if we're sighted in at 300. Now I'm going to get into this a little bit more further into the video, but briefly, by saying that, I mean that 360 yards, from 360 yards over to us, anything in between that, we can just hold dead on the animal as far as the point of aim. Because nowhere in that distance is the bullet going to rise higher than 5 inches or drop lower than 5 inches. So we can hit a 10-inch target very reliably. And that is something that will be described in more detail further in the video. But 270 would do about the same thing. 30-06, you're probably cutting back a little bit on 360 yards. You know, maybe the sight-in distance would be more like 270 yards, and you get a 300-yard point-blank range. Depends on the load and the bullet and things like that. So I'll try to explain that a little bit more later on. But right for now, just as a basic concept, with a hunting rifle, what you want to do is you want to get a very long point-blank range. And as I'll explain further into the video, once you have that established, really a whole lot of the other concerns and points of discussion, they basically kind of go out by the wayside, because we're going to talk about how accurate you can actually shoot and things like that. So once we get into that, you'll realize that this is actually way simpler than a lot of people make it appear. And we'll then talk about scopes to deal with that situation as well, in full knowledge of that. So let's get on to the next thing. Next, we're going to deal with what I've called the range myth, and this is a very important subject. We won't spend too much time on it, but it is very critical. By range myth, I mean it actually in two ways. In the first place, you have to go out to the range and actually test yourself. This is really important for assessing your own abilities. That may be something that changes over time, but for the point in time that you are choosing a rifle to use for hunting, this is something worth considering. Don't be fooled by what people post on social media and things like that about these amazing tight groups that they shoot, and you know, they're shooting with from bench rest positions and all that kind of stuff. What you have to do is you have to go to the range and test yourself. This is all just about you, okay? It's not a comparison or anything like that. You want to know for yourself, what are you actually capable of doing in the field? And that means shooting from a variety of shooting positions. So try it from a standing position, see how far out you can shoot that way, and from a sitting position, and you know, various positions that you might be able to take advantage of in the field. The way you want to assess yourself is in a realistic fashion for hunting, and that means hitting a target that's about a 10-inch diameter circle. You might want to restrict that down to 8 inches in diameter for deer, but let's say 10 inches. And the type of shooting you should be able to do is having the ability to put not just 1 or 2 out of several shots in that 10-inch circle, but you have to be able to put 10 out of 10 shots in that 10-inch diameter circle. Okay, so this is going to depend on what kind of shooting position you're in, and this is where you really assess yourself. Okay, so you go out to the range and actually try this stuff with a rifle. You know, if you already have a rifle, go out and see what you can actually do with it. If you don't have one, well, maybe you'll have to take my word on this to some extent, and I'll delve into that a little bit later. When you determine what your actual effective shooting range is, that's going to guide you with everything else here. Okay, because if, let's say you take everybody says you got to have a 7mm Remington Magnum rifle or 300 Winchester Magnum to go hunting. Oh, you know, that gun is so good for me, you know, and with that gun I can shoot, hit elk at 400 yards, no problem. All that kind of talk is good, you know, because a rifle like that, the advantage of a 7mm mag or a 300 Win mag is that you can extend your point blank range out to about 400 yards. It gives you some extra range. They're really flat shooting rifles. But you've got to hold on for a second here. Everybody's saying this, but who is actually able to ethically take a shot at 400 yards? If nobody is, then what's the point? And really, a lot of people do take shots that are way further out than they actually should be shooting. So, you know, there is that. But we're talking about yourself, and you've got to be guided by your own abilities and use your own common sense on this. I've already talked about the negatives of shooting a heavy recoiling rifle, and how, in terms of power, you know, it's very questionable how much you need. You can get by with a nice shooting, mild recoiling rifle. You don't have to go to a Magnum. Now, if you go to the range and you find out that actually for me, I cannot hit that 10-inch circle 10 out of 10 times from a resting position with my rifle. So if I'm at 300 yards, let's say. So if past 300 yards, you're at 400 yards, let's say, you're just kind of 50-50 hitting it in that 10-inch circle, you know you're setting yourself up for a wounding game with 400-yard shots. And that's in perfect conditions. You know, we don't have the stress of the hunt, we don't have varying crosswinds, which really start to play a role when you get out to 400 yards. So taking a 400-yard shot should just be off the table anyways. So why are you buying a 7mm mag? People say, oh, I can do it, but really the rubber meets the road when you actually do it on the range. You're proving these things to yourself. You have to be brutally honest. when it comes to that. So let's not get caught by our egos here. Hunting is not a competitive sport either, so it's not about who has the biggest gun in the hunting party. Okay, it's you know, the hunter who really stands out, if you want to make it a competition, is the guy who day in or time out after time, he's the one that comes back with an animal. The other guys can walk around with their big rifles and stuff like that, but if they're always missing their shots, you know, what's the use of that? Okay, so that's why I call this the range myth. It's a range in terms of you have to use a range to prove yourself. A lot of people don't like to prove themselves. They sort of have a suspicion that they're not really as good as those one or two shots they made in the past, that, oh yeah, they had a really close group. You know, they got to test themselves, see how far can I take a shot standing up, how far can I take one kneeling down, how far can I take one if I'm resting my gun in a sitting position or laying down, things like that. That's all that really matters. It's totally different than target shooting and competition shooting for that matter. Okay, so forget the ego and make your choice based on realistic abilities. And I think for the vast majority of hunters, when they do that, they really have to conclude that 7mm mags and 300 Win mags and rifles like that, they're really totally overdoing things. They're paying a huge price in terms of mastering the rifle, very likely, and they're not getting any good out of it. Next, let's deal with what I call the resources myth. When I first introduced this subject, you might have wondered what I'm talking about as far as the resources. And what I mean is the focus on where to put your resources when it comes to hunting. We don't go hunting necessarily to get money ahead and things like that. But you do want to kind of, everybody has limited resources with few exceptions to devote to hunting, and so where do you spend your money? And it's almost kind of a comical situation in a way, and I don't mean to make fun of anybody, but you know, people will go out and they'll spend huge amounts of money on buying a big truck. They're going to take time off from work, which costs a lot of money to do. They'll buy an ATV, they'll buy the fanciest tents, they'll have the most expensive high-tech clothing, you know, what have you. There's you know, game trail cameras. There's so much stuff to spend your money on when it comes to hunting. It's really getting to be quite a racket. And hey, you know, I mean, if it makes you feel good, that's great. But it's almost comical that in this context, the very same hunters, you say, oh, let's go take a few shots, or even to themselves, you know, the idea of going out and shooting off a box of 20 cartridges to, you know, just to get more experience, to try their guns out, make sure everything is shooting straight. That's like, oh, that's too much money all of a sudden. But really, I mean, the whole focus point of the hunt comes down to that point where you get that opportunity. It may only be one opportunity in the entire hunt that you get. You may go out hunting for a week, even 2 weeks, and you only get one opportunity to get an animal. It may be a very fleeting one too. And it all comes down to that one instant in time. All that money that's been spent on gas to get to where you are, taking time off, you know, all these things come down to that one point where it's the moment of truth and you have to get that animal that you now have a chance to. That's where it comes down to shooting, and you gotta have. I just noticed that my light went out, battery went dead on it, and I kind of thought, well, just keep on going here because I got plenty of light anyway. So hope you don't mind a little interruption, but let's carry on from where we were. I was talking about how everything comes down to that point where you have to take a shot, and this is where all your experience, all your practice, your choice of rifle, all those things come into play. And that is the point where it's very easy to make a mistake too. You could raise the rifle to shoot, and you line up and you aim, you start pulling the trigger, and pulling it, and then you realize, what is going wrong, you know, and then, oh shoot, I forgot to take the safety off. Something stupid like that, eh? And those type of things can be avoided by simply becoming very familiar with your rifle. Everything should be automatic, because in high stress situations, that's when your training pays off. You just do it without thinking, and you focus on the most important things. Okay, so I wanted to deal with that in this resources myth. Now, sort of connected to that is, it's a little bit curious actually, that people are actually rather reluctant to go out to the range, and I'm just going to put this out here. It might be sort of controversial, but there might be a psychological reason for this too. In the background of people's minds, they may know that if they're honest with themselves, they're not as good a shot as they would like to think they are. We all have our little bit of vanity, don't we? And so we kind of create little stories we tell ourselves, and it kind of builds our confidence. And you know, we made a really good shot once or twice, and then you kind of use that as a template of this is what your capabilities are, and then you can go out and you can be confident and you can accomplish things. I mean, if you don't have confidence and you're always questioning yourself, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to do very much. So I can understand that, but there is perhaps a tendency to resist tampering with this myth that we have of ourselves, and going to the range has that slight danger of disrupting that image. And I just want to say in regards to this that it's really better that you know the truth, know yourself, and realize that, you know, maybe it's some pretty short ranges that you just can't put 10 shots out of 10 into a 10-inch diameter circle. And if that's the case, you got two courses of action open to you. On one hand, don't take shots out that far, because you can't do it. And on the other hand, start looking at your equipment and practicing with your rifle. So better that you know these things, because if you keep on going out hunting and hunting year after year, and then honestly I've seen this, and I bet you a lot of people have, there are hunters that go out year after year. They spend a lot of time and they really enjoy it, so don't get me wrong, it's not like it's a total waste if you come home with nothing, but they go out year after year and come back home empty, and they wonder what I should do. Maybe I got to buy this or that. You know, really, they got to work on their shooting skills in a lot of cases. They would take care of all that stuff just by developing their shooting skills. Maybe re-examining what kind of shooting equipment they're using too. You know, as you get older, your eyes start to get a little poor. Maybe you have to switch from open sights to a scope. All those kinds of things. So you're not going to know. You're better off to find out this stuff on the range and be honest about what your capabilities are, and then you can know if there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and start addressing it. So that's basically what I want to say about the range myth, or the resources myth. The next myth I want to bring up is going to be very brief, and it's a bit questionable whether I should include it in this video, because we're really talking about how to choose a big game rifle. But you know, based on what I just finished saying about the resources myth and how you need to practice and things like that, and the absolute importance of being able to make your shots, you know, choosing rifles and all that, it's you can buy the best rifle, make the best choice possible in terms of which caliber cartridge to get and what scope to put on it, all those things. But you have to be able to hit your target at the time that you get the opportunity to do so. And that's where I want to get into the shooting stance myth. Now the shooting stance myth is something that I never see covered. But personally I've seen it many times over the years, that the only reason a hunter doesn't get the animal that he was after is because he didn't take advantage of a good shooting stance. Everybody seems to have this notion in their head. I don't want to be too broad in generalization, but it's a notion that when you see an animal, you have to shoot it standing up on your hind legs. And really that's the last ditch measure to take when you're hunting. Good hunters, the ones that come back from the field with game, are ones who tend to cheat as much as they can. It's not about proving how accurate you can hit while standing up. You can take advantage of any little trick you can to get shot placement right, and that means as soon as you see an animal, you're kind of aware of where you are. Is the animal aware of me? Can I kind of move a little bit over to this tree where there's a bit of a branch, and can I steady myself, even my body, against that tree? Some sort of steadying method for my rifle. Or can I kind of dip down to one knee and take a shot from a kneeling position? That's going to be steadier than standing on my hind legs. Maybe I can even sit down on the ground and take a shot that way. That's even better than shooting from one knee. Or hey, really, if there's any possibility at all of getting a chance to lay flat down on the ground and see over the grass or whatever and still be able to see the animal, lay down on the ground, even if it's not super far away. It's get the best shot you can off, if circumstances allow, of course. Now there are times when the animal's not going to be there. You just have to take a shot standing on your hind legs, and that's when, going back to the resources myth section, that you have to be aware of what kind of shots you can actually pull off from a standing position, because it really does impact your ability to make an accurate shot. So determine that for yourself. Think about that 10-inch circle, and really you should be able to hit that diameter of a circle 10 times out of 10. Connected with that, I'm just going to go a little bit further with it. This whole business of shooting lots. Give some thought to reloading, because when you start to take a bunch of shots from kneeling positions and laying down positions and standing positions, shooting from trees, you're going to go through a lot of ammunition. This isn't like shooting 22s anymore. In your childhood, with big bore ammo, it costs a fair bit, and if you reload, you're not necessarily going to save any money. You're going to maybe spend more money in the overall, to be quite honest. You don't reload to save money. You reload so that you can shoot lots. That's really the main thing. And even accuracy takes a second place to that, because most factory ammunition, to be quite honest, it's shooting out of modern rifles. It's so bloody accurate. It easily meets the requirements of hunting. We don't have to be able to shoot half-inch groups as a rule for big game hunters. So get into use reloaded ammunition to save money and get lots of shooting practice. That's my advice, anyways. The next subject we're going to deal with is what I've called the sight-in distance myth. And this is one of the most important parts of this video, I think, because it's one of the least understood and most misunderstood aspects of this whole topic here. Hunters need to understand what a rifle's optimum sight-in distance is to make the most use of the rifle that they have. And there seems to be kind of an idea out there that everybody wants to sight it in at 100 yards, and I guess maybe that's because they've heard it from somebody else, and maybe it just goes back to the days of like where 30-30s were most commonly used, and their grandpa always sighted in at 100 yards. But our modern hunting rifles, that's just wasting your rifle's capability to sight it in at 100 yards in most cases. So let's talk a little bit about that next. What you want to do is sight in your rifle to take advantage of what's called its point blank range. And that point blank range depends on the rifle, on the cartridge that the rifle's chambered for, and the ballistics of that round. So I'll try to explain this as clearly as I can, and I'll start off by saying that we begin with the size of the target you need to hit, and in hunting we quite often call that a 10-inch circle. If it's a deer, you might want to say an 8-inch circle, but let's say a 10-inch circle for a kill zone. That means that if you aim dead on in the middle of the lungs of mid-height in the body to the lungs of a deer or a moose, if you were to hit 5 inches higher than your point of aim, you're still going to kill it. You're still going to shatter the lungs. And if you hit 5 inches lower, you're going to shatter the lung, blow a hole through the lungs, and maybe the heart as well. So you're still good within that range. And you start off with that goal in mind of hitting a 10-inch circle. So then the next step is to take a look at what kind of a cartridge you're shooting, and you have to refer to ballistics tables in order to determine that. And it's you know, maybe that's a little intimidating for some people, but it's really not all that hard. It's quite often information that's supplied with ammunition. The days of the internet, it's very easy to get that. You can go to a lot of sites like loaddata.com, I think, places like that, where you can just select your cartridge, the weight of your bullet, and the velocity, and you just punch that into an online calculator, and then you say, okay, this sighting distance for 0, give me a listing of where the bullet is in flight, above or below my sight line at every distance up to, let's say, 500 yards or something like that. It's actually very easy to do, and it's very important to do. That's how you're going to take advantage of your rifle's abilities. Because if you have, let's say, a 270 that you could sight in to hit dead on at 300 yards, and you're sighting it in at 100 yards, you're really wasting that rifle, that cartridge's capabilities, because when you get a shot presented to you that's a 300-yard shot, if you aim dead on the animal, if I'm just doing the calculations in my head, I think you're going to miss it by holding dead on. Whereas, you know, of course you're going to get at 100 yards, but you know, you shouldn't have to aim high for a 300-yard shot when you're using a 270. You should be able to just aim dead on, because that rifle's going to shoot so flat that if you adjusted your scope so that you're hitting right on the where the crosshairs are aimed at 300 yards, you're going to kill everything closer than 300 yards anyway. So why not take advantage of that and not have to use any height adjustments when you're aiming? Because we're getting back to this initial point in this video where we're talking hunting, not target shooting, where we know distances. In the field, we don't know distances, and quite often a 300-yard shot might look like a 100 or 150-yard shot, especially if you're looking at an animal that's on the other side of a valley or things like that. So it's you really want to take advantage of your rifle's ability to compensate for your range estimation error. And the way to do that is to determine the point blank range of your cartridge. So that's what we're going to get into. So let's say we're keeping a 10-inch circle in mind, and we sight in our rifle so that we can look at our ballistics charts before going to the range and say, okay, according to this chart, if my rifle is sighted in to hit dead on at 300 yards, then it will have a mid-range height, like around 150 yards, of going no higher than 5 inches. And then you say, okay, then I'm good. Let's say the round you're using rises 6 or 7 inches, though, if you're according to the ballistics charts, if you're sighted in at 300 yards. Then you got to say, oh, okay, we're not going with the 300 yard sight in with this cartridge. Let's try 250. And then you select 250, and then you find out, okay, that's now the bullet is only rising 5 inches. So I guess 250 now is your proper sight-in range. You're going to kill everything that's between 100 and 250 and 0, which is really actually very good already. 30-30, you might want to select something like 150 yards, or at the most 200, to maintain that maximum mid-range height. But as you get into a 30-06, you get into longer ranges that you can set your 0 at while still being able to kill everything in between. And this is all, I can't give you any hard and fast rules on this, because a 30-06 shooting a heavy bullet is going to have a much more rainbow trajectory than 30-06 shooting a very light bullet. The light bullet's going to shoot flatter, and personally I tend to favor the bullets that are a little bit lighter and shoot flatter when I can, because I just find that I don't need the big bullets all that bad if I got my accuracy. And when we're talking accuracy is built in to this forgiveness factor of range estimation. This is real world accuracy, not range shooting competition accuracy. This is how many times can you hit that object at an unknown distance. Your accuracy is partly based on the forgiveness of your rifle in terms of its flat shooting ability. Having that 300-yard sighting distance, let's not forget that it can go a little further past that sighted distance and still be no further than 5 inches below where you aimed, and still kill the animal. So continue looking at once you've selected your appropriate sighting distance, look at the ballistics tables that you have and find out where it starts to go below 5 inches. Once it's at the 5-inch mark, let's say in the case of a 270 it's 360 yards, and that's just when it starts to go more than 5 inches below the point of aim. Then you can say 360 yards is my point blank range. So that's what we mean by a point blank range. You can kill everything from 360 yards to yourself just by aiming dead on. By having done this, and this is very important, by having done this, you're really stretching the capabilities of the cartridge you're shooting. Because let's say you do get a shot and it does look like it's 400 yards, and I've had situations like that before too. If I've sighted in my rifle at 150 when it really should be at 300, I'm not going to make that 400-yard shot, because I'm going to have to aim so high, and it's really bad guesswork by then. But if you're shooting a very flat shooting cartridge, even though it's got a point blank range of 360 yards, if you're a good shot and you know you can do these things, you can take that 400-yard shot. You're just going to have to aim a little bit higher, and you'll know from having practiced and examined learned the ballistics of your cartridge to how much you would aim. And of course your distance estimation is not going to be perfect in the field, but it'll be more likely to be close enough to make that kill. So that stretching out of your point blank distance is very important to do. Now that we've talked about the subject of point blank range and the sight in distance myth, that brings us back to the main subject of this video, which is choosing your big game rifle. And if you've been following along here, we've been talking about a number of things here. We've been talking about how far can you actually shoot your rifle effectively to hit a 10-inch target 10 times out of 10. We've been talking about the effect that Magnum, the recoil from a Magnum cartridge has on your shooting capabilities, both short-term and long-term, like long-term meaning the rest of your hunting life. So we've discussed that, and now we're into this point-blank range subject, and I think this tends to kind of tie things together to where things begin to gel in terms of selecting your big game rifle. So follow with me closely on this one if you can. We've been talking about some pretty capable rifles like 243, 270, 30-06. I'm not using every one in the book. You know, those are pretty good selection of rifles to use for examples. And the point blank ranges of those rifles, if you take the extent to which they don't drop below 5 inches under the point of aim, we're talking distances of 300 to 360 yards with those rifles. Those are long shots. Get out to the range and set a target out there. That's a long ways away. Now that we have established this as a fact of what these rifles can do, now we've got to ask ourselves, is there any need at all to shoot further than that, or have a rifle that's capable of a point blank range that is longer than that? Because that is, according to my understanding, that is the main reason for going to a Magnum cartridge like a 7mm mag or a 300 Win mag. With a cartridge that's pushing a bullet of equal weight way faster, or quite a bit faster, you're going to extend your range another 50 or 70 yards for a point blank range, and you could have a point blank range of 400 yards with some of these rifles. And that is the rationale behind using a rifle like that. So we have to return back to your abilities and honest assessment of what you can do, and take into consideration the impact it may or may not have on your shooting, depending on your experience level, and whether or not you've actually proven that to yourself, not just saying, yeah, I can do it, and put those things together also with consideration of the fact that how animals actually are killed by bullets, and the high importance of accuracy. So we put all those things together, and you probably should come to the conclusion that the non-Magnum cartridges are already doing everything you need them to do, because you're not going to take those shots that are farther than their point blank range anyways, right? Or not much further. So that's a point I think we should remember in this video about choosing a big game rifle. Magnum cartridges almost always, to be quite honest, are misused. They're selected for the wrong reasons, and I think quite often people have no idea why they're even selecting them, just kind of going on the assumption that more is better, right? But really, more is not always better. We're in a society where every year you have to have improvements, and in order to sell products. So, you know, last year's product isn't as good as this year's product because this year's product is this much bigger, or supersize it, or whatnot. But in reality, there is a point that, in my opinion, has been achieved already a long time ago, going quite a ways, quite a few decades back, quite frankly, that we've reached that optimum point, and for the majority of shooters, going past that is starting to be counterproductive. But you know, the business is what it is. They're trying to sell guns and new things. So keep that in mind when selecting a big game rifle. I really recommend that you, unless you have a very pressing need to get out to long distances and are able to prove to yourself that you can actually shoot at those distances ethically without wounding animals, you'd have to be a pretty good shot. Like, you've got to be able to dope wind and stuff like that. How many of you know how to do that? Figuring out, you know, that 450-yard shot, a little bit of a crosswind, you sure you got your point of aim just right on, but you're going to shoot them through the guts because of that wind. And it doesn't take very much at those distances. So that's what I have to say about the sighting myth. Just make maximum use of the cartridge you have. And if you buy a Magnum cartridge and you sight it in at 100 yards, you're really hurting yourself doubly, because not only are you taking all the pain and the loss in shooting function as a result of that cartridge, but you're not even getting any of the benefits anyway. So you know, this is a pretty important subject, and I think this is an important video for hunters to consider, especially the ones that are thinking about getting their first rifle. So let's move on to the next subject. We're going to deal with scopes next. Okay, now we get into the final section of this video where we examine the fancy scope myth. This is a part of the video where everything will come together, because now we've gone through the Magnum myth, the range myth, the resources myth, the shooting stance myth, and the sight and distance myth. And I think if you've been following, you can see that your ideas of what you need for a hunting rifle have started to congeal into something that involves far less choices. You can understand what you realistically need in a hunting rifle, and based on the reality of hunting and the reality of ballistics for modern hunting rifles, and how much these modern hunting rifles already satisfy all of your actual needs for hunting without going too far overboard. As we get into the scopes discussion, that will be affected by that as well, because knowing what we need really helps in this area. And scopes are one of those things that the manufacturers really try to create a perceived need around. And there's so many ways in which you can offer bells and whistles when it comes to scopes, that in order to entice consumers to be not satisfied with what they have and to upgrade to something new. And really, in a lot of cases, they do need to upgrade their scopes, because the older scopes, maybe they start to fog up and things like that. Scope technology is really excellent nowadays. But you've got to be careful not to get too carried away with all the features, because as we've discussed with the shooting distances and stuff like that are involved in real hunting, and the way that flat shooting cartridges really remove the need for having to aim high and low and figure out your ranges and stuff. You know, a lot of these features on modern scopes are designed to solve problems that really don't exist, except, you know, when you get out into the extremes of hunting. There, as I said in the beginning of this video, there are special circumstances, so I'm not saying that what I'm talking about covers every situation. It's what I see as applying to the vast majority of hunters. And I think we can begin by looking at the subject of scopes when it comes to the type of crosshairs that they have. A lot of the craze nowadays is having these bullet drop compensating scopes where you have a bunch of little ticks on your crosshairs, and you can use charts online and match them up with your cartridges, and those charts will tell you that, you know, if you're at this distance, you use this tick to aim on the animal, and if you're at another further distance, you use this tick, and so on. And you can, it's kind of like a recipe to success for hitting an animal at any distance. And the part where it all falls really flat is that, number one, it takes too much time to figure that kind of stuff out in the field. Number two, you don't even know what your ranges are to the animal anyways with a great degree of certainty. And number three, if you're getting out to ranges where you're out shooting your point blank distance, you're probably shooting too far anyway, so what's the point, right? So next, let's look at the subject of magnification. When it comes to magnification, the most common magnification levels are 3 power to 9 power. There was a time in the past when I think the majority of hunters used to use basically just a fixed 4 power scope, and that was good enough. And really, it's 4 power is still a pretty nice choice. Now that we have proliferation of variable power scopes, and they're pretty reasonable prices. Scopes coming out in a power range of 3 to 9 power are quite popular, and I don't have any issues with those kind of scopes. But I think we should keep in mind a couple of things about such scopes when it comes to magnification and variation of varying magnification power. I mean, if you're getting the magnification range for free, like something reasonable, like 3 to 9 power, without paying through the nose for it, then yeah, why not have that, eh? But in reality, I think for hunting, you're going to want to set your scope on its lowest magnification power anyways, like down to 3 power, if you've got a 3 to 9, because when it comes right down to it, if you're taking a far shot, you've got to put the crosshairs on your target. Turning it up to 9 power is not going to make you hold any steadier. You're better off staying at 3 power, because you can still make those long shots with the 3 power setting. But if you're walking through the bush and an animal presents himself closer, you may need to take a very quick shot. And a lot of the success in hunting depends on the ability to take advantage of an opportunity very quickly. So it's not like in a hunting magazine where you see a beautiful picture of an animal standing broadside, just ready to be shot. A lot of times when you're hunting, you're going to see just a little flicker of an ear, something like that, or part of an animal in the bush, and then as you look carefully, you say, oh yeah, there is an animal there. And you bring up the scope with your rifle and put it on him, and then all of a sudden, now where is he? It's the animal's kind of disappeared, because your magnification of your scope, you don't have a wide enough field of view to see the animal in the context of the bush. And while you're trying to figure out where this animal is and then looking again, the animal's taken off, because well, especially when they're close, they're not going to hang around very long as a rule. So high magnification can hurt you. In fact, there's a good argument to be made for just sticking with open sights, especially if you're hunting in heavy bush. That's what I do with my 30-30. But if I'm using a scope, I want to have it on the lowest magnification possible. I'd even go with 1.5 power to 6 power scope, something like that, in that range, because 6 power, if I needed it, is all I'm ever going to use, and I could do everything with 1.5 power, I'm quite sure. So you can pay a lot of money if you go with a scope that ranges right from 3 power up to 12 power or something like that, or 6 power up to 24 power. But then you're going to, with that 6 power to 24 power scope, you're stuck with a low end magnification of 6 power, and I think that's going to hurt you when it comes to picking up the closer end game. The game might be running too, so it's you want that field of view so that as you pick up the rifle, you're going to see a little bit of it as it's moving, and be able to maybe make that shot. So consider that when it comes to scopes. Magnification isn't going to make you shoot more accurately. Magnification might be handy if you're needing to shoot only animals with horns or certain size antlers, and you see some and you want to get a little closer look at it before you take a shot. Then you might want to turn that dial up to the maximum magnification and see if you can figure that out. So that could make the difference between getting something and not getting something. But in my opinion, I think more animals are missed from at the close ranges where the hunter isn't able to make the shot quick enough. So you know, you might lose one way or the other. More often, I think you're going to lose on the close animals, and that depends a lot on the type of hunting you're doing, of course, too. So if you're hunting in the open fields, much less of an issue than somebody hunting in quite often in thick bush. Maybe there's cut lines and stuff in thick bush, so you get a whole mixture of shots, some requiring close range, some requiring long range shots. So magnification is one of the things that, as a rule, you don't want to overdo it, and no sense to spend more money than you need to on it. One of the aspects of scopes, though, that is important is you do want to get a scope that's sturdy, that's good quality, and there's no way of getting around the fact that with scopes you're going to get what you pay for. Okay, so you might see two scopes sitting side by side, made by the same company, different parts of their lineup. One is $100 or $200 more than the other, and you look at it, you know, they're both same magnification range. They both have the same objective lens size, things like that. And you know, so why is the one more expensive than the other? And the reason is that when it comes to scopes, you're never going to get a free lunch. As you go up in quality with your scope, the manufacturing costs get higher. So the costs come in terms of the precision of the manufacturing. Like we're talking about thousands of the width of a hair sometimes when it comes to fitting the parts together to get everything to work right. You're talking about the quality of the glass that's used in the scope, the way it's ground. All those things take time and effort to do, and you can just kind of churn it out quick and for less money. But if you want to do it right, it's going to take more time. It's going to cost more money to make a scope like that. So it also comes in when in terms of the coatings that go on the glass of your scope. The amount of light that goes into your scope and gets right through to your eye is dependent on how little it reflects off the scope from the outside. And once it goes through the one lens, it goes and hits another lens, which again can bounce back some light. So if you have small differences in the amount of in the quality of the lens coatings, add up, and they start to multiply through the scope. This applies to binoculars as well, so that you can get a very different amount of light coming through a low power scope than a high power scope. And a little caveat or a little warning about that to keep in mind when you're evaluating scopes, let's say in a store, is that the scopes you're going to be looking at, you're looking at them comparing one to the other in nicely lit situations in a store, and a high quality scope might not look a whole lot better than the lower quality one, quite frankly. But that's because you're in good lighting conditions, and it's those dim light situations that's where the superior scope is going to really start to shine, so to speak. And really, when we're hunting, that's where most of our opportunities arises when it's very early in the morning, at the break of dawn, or just before it gets dark at night, and you see an animal and high quality scope with good light gathering ability. That sure makes a difference. The more expensive scopes will have a larger objective lens as well. That's also nice. You can get a wider field of view. You can also choose between scopes that have a 1-inch body or a 30mm body, which is a little bit bigger in diameter. There are pluses and minuses to these things. When you have a large objective lens, and by the objective lens I mean the lens that's furthest away from you, towards the muzzle, you're going to get more light coming through, and you're going to get a wider field of view, but you're also going to have a scope that's heavier, quite a bit heavier, and it's going to be, because of the size of it, when you have the gun underneath it, the scope has to be mounted a little bit higher to clear the barrel. And when you want your rifle to line up automatically for you with the scope, when you shoulder it, a scope that's too high, you have to kind of crane your head a little bit. And that brings in all kinds of effects, like your head is a little bit unsteady. It's better if it's just resting against the cheek of the rifle and holding it steady. So a scope with a smaller objective lens that is set to the right height will get you lined up on your target quicker and with more accuracy as well. So keep that in mind. Yeah, what else can we say? When you have a scope with a 30mm tube, that may seem, well, that's going to gather more light, but that actually doesn't happen. It's the objective lens and the quality of the glass and the coatings on the glass. That's what's going to bring in the light. A 30mm tube versus a 1mm tube isn't there to let more light through. It's there to give you more adjustment from your turrets, so you can adjust through a higher range of vertical and horizontal with your crosshairs. And as far as hunting goes, and I'm talking about the main type of hunting most people do, you don't really need that. That's for guys taking shots out to 1,000 yards, stuff like that, where they have to really crank up their turrets to raise the crosshairs high enough so that they can shoot high enough to have their bullet hit the target at a long distance. In hunting situations, you're not doing 1,000-yard shots, so don't buy the large diameter scope bodies thinking you're going to get more light. It's not going to happen that way. The higher end scopes also tend to have parallax adjustment on them. That's a knob that's quite often on the left hand side, so you have your 3 knobs. You have your height and your windage adjustment, and then you have a parallax adjustment. That again comes into when the scopes get up to over 10 power. The scopes are usually, if they go up to 10 power, the parallax is not going to be a problem, and we won't even bother getting into it. It's basically a way of making the image that you're looking at exist on the same plane that the crosshairs are on, and the scopes that don't have parallax adjustment on them that are below 10 power, they're doing just fine as far as that goes. So don't worry about parallax adjustment for the most part, and when it comes to hunting. What else can we get into with scopes? You've got to remember too that the bulkiness of your rifle is a concern. So a very bulky scope is it's heavy and it's a little bit clumsier. So, but most of all, I think you have to kind of consider the hunting situations you're going to be in. You're going to be in situations where you need to take a very quick shot, and good hunters are the ones that are able to size up a situation and take a shot very rapidly. And I'm not talking about carelessness here. We're just talking about making up your mind and pulling that trigger when without any fooling around. Too many videos you see on the internet, you see hunters saying, oh yeah, okay, no, I'm going to wait till he moves just here, just here, just here. And they're waiting and waiting, and then the animal wanders away or something like that. Or, of course, in perfect perfect land that they live in, it's, yeah, they get the animal anyways. But in reality, you can miss a lot of animals by farting around too much. So you want to have a scope that gets you on target, and have a point blank range set so that you don't have to worry about figuring out how high or how low you have to shoot. You just get those crosshairs on that animal and you get the job done really quick. Yeah, I guess there's not too much more to say about it. I mean, the issue of scopes is a pretty important one. Consider going with open sights if your eyes are good. There is actually one other aspect to scopes that you should get into as well, and I'm going to have to get into a little bit of math to do this, so I apologize beforehand, but and it's just got to be done. Sorry. We're going to talk about what's called the exit pupil, and this is something that's going to be determined by your age, what your answer is to this. But the exit pupil that's the ocular lens on your scope, the one that's closest to you. It's going to let a cone of light come out of it that will meet your eye. Okay, so you have all the light coming in the front of your scope to the objective lens, and then it goes through the lenses, and then it kind of comes out on the other end as a smaller picture of what the scope is being aimed at. And that cone of light has a diameter, and that's what they call in the industry the exit pupil. And if you're a young person, you might have, well, let's put it this way, your eyes have a pupil in them, and your pupil can only, it opens and closes with varying light conditions, so that you don't get blinded when it's too light. You know, then your eye pupil closes, and when it's getting dark outside, your eye pupil gets larger to accept more light. Well, unfortunately, with guys that are getting older, which I might be among, your pupil doesn't open up as much anymore when you get older. It can open up, they say, to, you know, might get as bad as to around 4 millimeters. I'm talking metric, since I live in Canada. Sorry, you guys in the imperial system, I'll have to figure this out. But so we can get 4 millimeters when we're older. A young person actually could get maybe 7 millimeters of pupil diameter. So the reason I mention that is because the exit pupil, which is a measurement of how the diameter of the cone of light coming out of your scope, if it's larger than that, the diameter of that image is larger than that, you're not going to get any more. If it's larger than your pupil can accept, you're not going to get any more light anyways. So 7 millimeter exit pupil on a scope is not going to do any better for a guy with a 4 millimeter limitation on his pupil than a 4 millimeter exit pupil will, because all he can make use of is 4 millimeters for the old guy. The younger fellow can maybe make use of 7 millimeter exit pupil on his scope. Okay, so now hopefully that's kind of clear. You can only use as much light coming out of that scope as your pupil is able to expand and accept. So now, how do you figure out what your exit pupil is? The way to do that is you take your main lens, and let's say it's a 50 millimeter lens, and you take the magnification that you're going to be using, and you take that diameter of the lens and you divide it by the magnification. So let's say it's a 50 millimeter lens and you're dividing it by 9. Then you're going to get, and I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but you're going to get, more than 4 millimeters of exit pupil. That's actually what that division does for you. You divide the diameter of the main lens by the magnification, and that tells you the size of the exit pupil of light that's coming out to meet your eye. If it works out to be, if you're an old fella and that division works out to be more than 4 or 5 millimeters, you got an objective lens that's too big. It's going to give you more light than your eye can use. You might as well go with a smaller objective lens. So keep that in mind. It's actually related to you know, when you get these low power scopes. You see them, you never know some of the low power scopes that go like 1.5 to 6 power. They don't even have a bulge on the end for the objective lens. It's just the same diameter as the 1-inch tube going through, or the 30 millimeter tube. And that's because that 25 millimeters at the end divided by 6 or by 1.5 power, it's still giving you enough a 4 millimeter exit pupil or whatever. You know, so you don't need a large objective lens on the end. It just has to be the diameter of the scope that the scope tube is already. So it's once you get into the higher powers, that's why you have the larger objective lenses, because you're trying to achieve enough of an exit pupil that your eye can make use of, and that does vary again with age. So be wise on that point too, and kind of stay away from the what they call the BDCs, or bolt drop indicators, and all the fancy stuff. I think if you have your rifle shooting to a good point blank range, which is probably going to be about the same range that you're capable of shooting accurately anyways, ranges longer than that, you should probably pass on anyhow. Coupled with the fact that you really can't do all this math in your head and in the field and say, okay, well, now I'm doing 500 yards and that means tick number 3 or something like that. You know, you don't be under stress when you're hunting, except for, you know, the special circumstances. There are some people that can do that and make use of it, but for the average hunter, that stuff's never going to impact you anyway. So go with a reticle on your scope that's thick enough so that you can pick it out against heavy brush and stuff like that, maybe with a very fine point portion in the middle, so you can really so the crosshairs don't obscure your target, and spend a little bit of money. You know, do it within your budget. That's something that depends on how much you can afford, but money spent on a good scope is not wasted, as long as it's not spent on doodads that you don't need. Just buy something with good quality glass, good coatings to gather your light, something that's a sturdy scope, because a scope can take a lot of banging around when you're hunting. So stick with that. I mean, a scope is something that actually makes your gun and your sighting system very sturdy. It's my rifles with the open sights are the ones I worry about more when it comes to getting things knocked out of a line from hard use. It's easy to knock an open sight out of whack through banging around, but the scopes are made pretty strong nowadays. When you get your scope, maybe give some thought to having it mounted by a professional. If you don't, if you want to do it yourself, try to get yourself a torque wrench, something that measures inch-pounds. The rings that you clamp on to tighten that scope onto your rifle, you don't want to have those tightened any more than about 15 to 18 inch-pounds. This isn't like the old days in the 50s and 60s or whatever, where the scope tubes were made out of steel, and you could just crank them right down and make them tight, and you don't have to worry about it. The new scopes are made out of, I think it's aluminum, and that stuff does crush, and there's delicate mechanisms inside the scope tube, so you got to be, if you tighten it down, those scope rings, any more than about 18 inch-pounds, you stand at great risk of damaging some of those inner components. So make sure you get your scope mounted right, and once you got it set on there properly, you probably never have to worry about it again. So that ends the section on the fancy scope myth, and I hope together with the magnum myth, the range myth, the resources myth, the shooting stance myth, and the sight in distance myth, I hope that we put together sort of a complete package when it comes to assessing your needs for hunting rifle. When it comes to choosing one, what are the criteria, what are the important things to have in mind, and whatever gun you get, you know, go out and shoot lots with it, practice with it. It's fun to shoot. Don't worry about what other people can do, just focus on what you can do. So thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel. It's The Way to Native Chronicles. Thank you.